this event at church, we always take an offering. And so after that last singing, that we'll do after the communion, then of course our offering as usual. So this is now the 6th week that we have conducted worship the way our Baptist forebears might have done it 250 years ago. This year is the 250th anniversary of America, of course, this year. And 250 years ago, Baptists would have worshipped very much the way that we have done it for these 6 weeks. I don't know what you think about it. Nobody said anything to me. I don't know what you think about it. I do care, but nobody said anything. I've thought a lot about it myself. And the next two midweek memos, of course, I don't know if you read that either. Nobody ever tells you to do this. For the next two midweek memos, we're going to write about this journey we've taken, the journey back in time, and then, okay, what about the road ahead? We'll do these services through the 14th. We have Brother Sam Brassell with us for the 7th and the 14th. The 7th, I'm at the Southern Baptist Convention in Orlando. And on the 14th, there's something about a marriage taking place. And I'm supposed to be involved in that somehow or other. The radio seems to think I'll be there. So anyway, we'll be, God willing, on our honeymoon that Sunday. So I won't be here. And Brother Sam will be here that Sunday. But we'll do the services pretty much as we've done them since April 19th. And then I'll be back Father's Day, and we'll see. I'm going to write about the next two Sundays, midweek memos, this week. I'm just going to look back, make some observations about those services from 250 years ago. And then in the next midweek memo, I'm going to say, well, okay, what about now? What do we do now? So if you have thoughts, please, all things. We have come to the book of Hosea. The book of Hosea is the first book of the minor prophets. They're called minor, by the way, not because they're unimportant. I mean, some of these prophecies are just every bit as important as Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel. They're called minor only because they're shorter. That's the only reason. And a couple of them are just one chapter, just a few verses. Hosea is the longest of the minor prophets. It's 14 chapters. It's the longest by far. But that's the reason. In the Hebrew Bible, what we call the minor prophets, the 12 minor prophets, in the Hebrew Bible are just one book called the Book of the 12. But again, we call them minor not because they're unimportant, but because, generally speaking, well, in every case, they're shorter than the big prophets, Isaiah and so forth. And Hosea is the longest one. And Hosea is not the first one. Time-wise, they're divided into three groups. There are those minor prophets who wrote before the exile, beginning in 605 BC. There were those who wrote during the exile period, 605 down to 539 or so. And then those who wrote after the exile, like Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi. So three groups of these minor prophets, but we're going to take them each in order, and we'll kind of note the time as we go. Hosea is not the earliest of the minor prophets. Amos and Joel both were earlier. But Hosea is the longest, which undoubtedly is why Hosea is put first. Hosea wrote, as we read in chapter 1, at the very beginning, we'll come there. Hosea wrote, we read, the word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. These are four kings of the southern kingdom. And in the days of Jeroboam, this is Jeroboam the second. There were two Jeroboams in the northern kingdom. There was Jeroboam the first, the son of Nebat, who was really the founder of the northern kingdom. He rebelled against against Solomon's son, Rehoboam, and basically founded the northern kingdom and kind of created his own system of worship and religion to distinguish distinguished between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and almost immediately everything started going downhill in the northern kingdom. So Jeroboam II comes along, about 150 years later. He rules from about 786 to 745, that period, 41 years, Jeroboam II. And his reign was a very prosperous reign. In fact, I remember this as if it were yesterday, even though it was over 40 years ago. I had a group of students in Israel for an archaeological dig, and every night, well, most every night, we sat outside on the lawn and listened to a lecture by Professor Amnon Ben Tor of Hebrew University. And he was lecturing on archaeological finds about different periods of Israelite history. And on this one night, he was lecturing about the period of Jeroboam II. And I will never forget this. He had a wooden, like a pointer that he used to, he was doing slides, and he would point to pictures on the slides, all these archaeological discoveries and such. And at one point, he took that stick and just slammed it onto a metal lectern that he was using. And of course, it made a loud crash. It was like cymbals in a band. And so he smashed the lectern, and he said, talking about Jeroboam first and how great his reign was and what great things he did. And Professor Ben Tor said, and the Bible just dismisses him by saying he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Professor Ben Tor was greatly incensed by that, as if the Bible was ignoring all of Jeroboam's greatness because he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Well, the Bible doesn't exactly ignore Jeroboam's greatness. We won't take time to turn there, but if you turn to 2 Kings chapter 14, you read that, yes, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. He reigned 41 years, did evil. He was an ungodly king. But the scripture also says that he restored the borders of Israel from Hamat, the land far to the north of Israel, all the way to the Sea of the Arabah, which is the Dead Sea. So he extended the border, he greatly enlarged the northern kingdom. And in fact, Jonah the prophet was kind of his court prophet. We'll see that when we get to Jonah. At any rate, Jeroboam II was, in many ways, a great king, materially speaking. So during his 41-year reign, the northern kingdom of Israel was prosperous. But it was like the more they prospered, the more they sinned. They were, I would say it this way, they were prosperous and perverse at the same time. And the more the more prosperity they experienced, the more perversity they did. They were prosperous and perverse. So Hosea is prophesying to this northern kingdom, which is very prosperous like America today, and very ungodly like America today. So what does Hosea say? Well, Hosea speaks to the northern kingdom in two different ways. First of all, he speaks through his own experience. If you know anything about Hosea, and I won't take time to ask what you know or don't know, but most people, most Christians, if they know anything about Hosea at all, they know this. They know that Hosea married a woman named Gomer, G-O-M-E-R, Gomer, who turned out to be unfaithful, whether he married her knowing that she was unfaithful, or whether he married her in good faith and she simply proved to be unfaithful. Well, the jury's out on that. We don't really know. But he married a woman who was unfaithful to him. And she bears 3 children. In fact, scholars often point out that there is some evidence in the text itself that the first child was actually Hosea's child, but the other 2 were not. Can't be sure. But clearly she was an unfaithful wife. And out of that tragedy in Hosea's own life, I mean, some of you have probably walked down that road, but is there anything more hurtful? Is there anything that emotionally is more traumatic than for a wife or a husband to be unfaithful in their marriage? Is there anything? I mean, what compares to that? I've done a lot of counseling over the years, and I don't know of any experience people can have that's more hurtful than that. And so Hosea experienced it. He walked those waters. And God used that to use Hosea to preach a message to these rebellious Israelites. And the message was that just as Hosea's wife was unfaithful to him, Israel has been unfaithful to me, God says. It's like adultery. By the way, the Bible often compares rebellion against God to adultery. So Hosea's own experience, God uses to preach to them. I'm just going to put a little parenthesis here. I won't take long with this, but I just can't resist pointing out that God often does this. We see this in other prophets too. How God used some hard experience in their lives to proclaim a message. I mean, we see it in Paul's life. Paul talks about how he was given a thorn in the flesh, lest he be exalted because of the great message that had been given him. So the thorn in the flesh was intended to keep him humble as a preacher of the gospel. God often does that. God often uses tragedy in our lives to minister to other people. God does that. That's the way God works. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul talks about a period in his life when he despaired of life. He had some affliction. He didn't tell us what it was, but he had some affliction. And it was so severe that he thought he was going to die. And then he says something very interesting. But God, who comforts the depressed, comforted us. And then he adds this. Listen, go read it. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, I think it's verse 3. But he says, but God who comforts the depressed comforted us so that we ourselves might comfort others with the comfort with which we ourselves have been comforted. Well, that's the way God does. He did it in Hosea, he did it in Paul, and he can do it in your life and mine. But then what is the message? What message is it that Hosea is going to preach? Well, I always like to give you an outline of the book, and I want to give you a verse to hang on to. In this case, in the case of Hosea, I want to give you a word, and this word will kind of focus your mind on the message that God gives through this prophet. The words might be a little surprising. The word to remember for Hosea is hopelessness. Many Christians have seriously misinterpreted Hosea because they've missed that word. Now, of course, I know that word is not found in the book of Hosea, but the thought is everywhere. In fact, let me suggest to you that Hosea, the book, divides up into 3 parts, each of which is characterized by hopelessness. Part 1, chapters 1 and 2, hopelessness and hope. We'll come back to that. Part 2, chapters 3 to 11, hopelessness and sin. Part 3, chapters 12 and 14, hopelessness and grace. Hopelessness and hope, hopelessness and sin, hopelessness and grace. Let's go back to that first part, hopelessness and hope. I want to direct your attention to a single verse. This is the key verse, in my judgment, in the book of Hosea, chapter 2, verse 15. Once you turn there. Before I read this verse, let me just point out that in the first 2 chapters, we read about Hosea's experience with Gomer, the unfaithful wife, the birth of the 3 children, who are all given symbolic names to indicate how God regards his people in the northern kingdom. Okay? Like Lo Ruchama, no mercy, and Lo Ami, not my people. Names that are symbolic of God's relationship with Israel. But in that same first chapter, God speaks of a hope that is to come. Talks about how just as Gomer pursued her other loves, not realizing that it was God who gave them their gifts, not their other loves, it was God who gave them their gifts. And so God promises that someday, though, they will come back. But before that day comes, they are going to experience the judgment of God upon their sin. They are going to be judged. In other words, their situation is hopeless. They are going to be judged. There is no turning back from that now. Let me jump ahead just very briefly before I go back to that crucial verse. Let me go to those next chapters, 3 to 11. In chapters 3 to 11, the theme is hopelessness and sin. And if you read those chapters, what you find is that God outlines in detail, in great detail, what the sins of Israel are, how even the priests are guilty. They are leading the charge of sin. They're sinning worse than anybody else. I've shared with some of you that I attended the graduation of my granddaughter at Furman University. Furman University was founded in 1826 as a Baptist university in South Carolina. It has a great history. Richard Furman was a great Baptist leader. Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville started at Furman. It was for years a great Baptist university. I attended the graduation. So the chaplain has the opening prayer, the invocation, and the benediction. And never once mentioned the name of God. Never mentioned the name of Christ. Never mentioned the Bible. Referred to God as something like this: the source of all that is. Oh, source of all that is. At a Baptist university. They had a segment of the graduation they called land acknowledgement, which was an acknowledgement that the land on which Furman sits once was the tribal lands of the Cherokee Indians. So my daughter-in-law, who is a lawyer herself, turned to me and said, well, I heard a lot more tonight about the Cherokee Indians than I heard about God at a Baptist university. Well, Hosea says the same thing about Israel. Among the very people who should have known most about the greatness and the glory and the majesty and the power and the holiness of God, it's like they didn't care anymore. They were prosperous, life was good, everything is great. Who is God? Well, He's the giver of all that's good. But anyway, in those chapters 3 to 11, the message is this: that the sins of Israel are past the point of no return. Israel has gone beyond the point of no return. She is going to be judged. The situation is hopeless. Now back to chapter 2, verse 15. I'm going to start in verse 14, but the key verse is 15. Therefore, behold, I will allure her. God is making a promise. He's saying that down the way, sometime in the future, I'm going to draw Israel, this wayward people, back to me. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her, just as, by the way, Hosea did with his wife Gomer after she left him and ran off with somebody else. And Hosea went to retrieve her and spoke tenderly to her, it says. And God says, I'm going to do the same thing with Israel. Now listen to verse 15, critical verse. And there, in the wilderness, I will give her her vineyards, and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. You'll notice that the title of the message today is The Valley of Achor. All right, normally a pastor wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it. I don't really expect an answer, but I'm going to ask you, if you have an answer, give it to me. Where in the Bible do we read about the valley of Achor. What happened there?
Achor 7:24.
Good! Oh my Lord, goodness. Cheat.
I was ready now.
Of course, you knew that anyway. But that is exactly right. Joshua chapter 7. Israel has gone into the land of promise. Jericho fell by the power of God. But God had commanded the people, you don't take anything for yourself from Jericho. You don't take anything for yourself. Everything that you get goes to God. It's devoted to God. You don't take it for yourself. Well, there was a man named Achor who saw some fine things, some gold and garments and so forth, and he coveted those things, and he took them and hid them. So the next battle of Israel, they lost miserably at Ai, and Joshua falls on his knees and he's crying out to God, why has this happened? And God says, Joshua, get up off your face, stop belly aching to me. There is sin in the camp of Israel. The people of God have done what they ought not to have done. They have taken the consecrated things from Jericho. Well, Joshua conducts an investigation, and they find out that it was Achan and his family, and they're all put to death with everything they've got. Where? In the valley of Achor. The word Achor in Hebrew means trouble. In the valley of Achor. They were all put to death to cleanse Israel of its sin. Now, fast forward. And God says through Hosea the prophet, I have given you, Israel, rebellious Israel, whose sins are beyond the point of no return, like Achan. I have given you the valley of Achor as a door open. What he means by that is this, that God is going to judge the sin of the people of Israel who have rebelled against him, who have been unfaithful to him. He's going to judge their sin. There is no turning back. They passed the point of no return. But he's going to use that very judgment, the valley of Achor. He's going to use that very judgment as a way, ultimately, to bring Israel back to him. Wow. You know, just as God uses trouble in our lives to minister to other people, God uses judgments in our lives to minister to us. I have mentioned several times in the midweek memo, again, I don't have any idea if you read it or not. I've said often, I get a lot more feedback from people out of state than people. But anyway, not fussing, just anyway, I mentioned my friend up in Kentucky who's dying. The doctors have told him he has 3 to 6 months, and that was a month and a half ago. Talked to him last week. He is undergoing chemotherapy. For what reason, I don't know. He didn't explain. Normally, you would think, well, that's for prolonged life, but they've already told him, you got 3 to 6 months. There's nothing we can do. But I don't know. I don't know. But something he told me very interesting. He said the doctors have told him this chemotherapy regimen that he's undergoing. The doctors have said that they'll be doing these treatments, and until he hits bottom, that's the way they phrased it. You will hit bottom, and when you hit bottom, then hopefully we'll see some improvement. Now, improvement in what? I don't know, because they've already told him 3 to 6 months. That's it. He's already asked me to preach his funeral. I mean, that's how serious this is. But the reason I tell that story is that, you know, we understand this medically. How with certain conditions you kind of have to reach the bottom. When I had my heart surgery, the doctor told me, you're going to hate me tomorrow because you're going to feel like a semi run over you. And he wasn't wrong. You know, it hurt to think. But kind of had to go to that point, and then he started to improve. Well, we understand this. We've all gone through this sort of thing. And so what God says to Israel is, you're going to hit the bottom. It's done. You're past the point of no return. You are going to be judged. And of course they were. Assyria conquered them and took them away into captivity. It's going to happen. But I'm going to use that very judgment a way to bring you back. Now, my time is already almost gone, and I want to be very careful since we have communion today. So I'm going to fast forward. Obviously, we can't cover everything in Hosea. Suffice it to say that several places in the book of Hosea, God prophesies. Through Hosea, he prophesies about what is to come. And what is to come is that God is going to bring salvation to his people in such a way, and this is kind of amazing in this book, since it's about the divided kingdom, the northern and southern. And God says that somewhere down the way, after this exile of the northern kingdom, and then later there was exile of the southern kingdom. And God is going to use that to purify the people, and then he's going to send salvation that is that will reunite the two kingdoms. And of course, that's what happened in the ministry of Christ. Today is Pentecost Sunday. On the day of Pentecost, Jews from all over the world were in Jerusalem. And some would have hailed from the northern kingdom tribes, some would have hailed from the southern kingdom tribes, but they were all in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. And Peter preaches to them about Jesus, who had died on the cross and who had been raised from the dead. And then he says to them, and this one whom you crucified, God has made both Lord and Christ. And God's Holy Spirit worked in their hearts on that day of Pentecost so that they were convicted of their sin. And they asked, men and brethren, what shall we do? And Peter says, repent, that you may receive the promise of the Holy Spirit. So on the day of Pentecost, God fulfilled the promise that he made in the book of Hosea. Because God is a God of infinite, matchless, marvelous love and grace. I wish I had more time, but in chapters 12, 13, and 14, that's the message. Hopelessness and grace. And in several different ways, we don't have time for all this now, but in several different ways, God reminds his people that despite what you've done, and despite the fact that judgment is coming, the valley of Achor is coming, there is still hope. Because I've given you the valley of Achor as a door of hope. So he reminds them in chapter 12 that he had sent the prophets to them time and time again. He reminds them, this is not the first time you've heard these words. I have sent messengers to you time and time and time again, warning you, and you didn't listen. But that was God's grace that he warned them and warned them and warned them and warned them and warned them. I spoke to the prophets. It was I who multiplied visions and through the prophets gave parables. That's in chapter 12, verse 10. Or again, in chapter 13, he says, but I am the Lord your God. This is in verse 4. But I am the Lord your God from the land of Egypt, that is, from the time that I brought you out of Egypt. You know no God but me, and besides me there is no other. So he reminds them that there's only one God. There's only one God who is the source of all that matters in human life. And again, in chapter 14, listen to this. This is the way the book closes. Verse, Verse 8. O Ephraim, what have I to do with idols? It is I who answer and look after you. I am like an evergreen cypress. From me comes your fruit. And here's the invitation with which Hosea closes. Remember, they are going to be judged, but God still holds out the invitation to anyone who will listen. The nation itself, they're beyond hope. It's hopeless. They are going to be judged. But if there's anyone listening, what does he say? Verse 9, the last verse of Hosea. Whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. The door is always open to anyone who will turn to the Lord Jesus. Well, my time is really gone. I First Peter chapter 2, a couple of my most favorite verses in all of the Bible come from Hosea. In Hosea chapter 1, we are told that Gomer has these children. There was a son and there was a daughter. The daughter was named Lo Ruhamah, which means no mercy. God will have no mercy on Israel anymore as a nation. And then there was Lo Ami, a son. That name means not my people. And so God promises in that first chapter that these, in the place where they were told no mercy, there would be mercy. And in the place where they were told they were not my people, they would be his people. He's referring, of course, to those who really do repent and turn to him. Well, Peter picks up on that. Talk about us Christians who are Gentiles. And he says, you know, we were outside the covenant of Israel. We weren't a part of the Israelite people, but we were rebels against God too. And we were certainly not his people. And we certainly received no mercy. As Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2, remember that at one time you were outside the covenant of Israel. You were without hope and without God in the world. Ephesians 2:11. So Peter picks up on all this, and he reminds these believers to whom he's writing, just as he reminds us, that when you were lost, you were outside of the fellowship of God's people, without hope and without God in the world. But now listen to what he says. Chapter 2, verse 9. But you are now a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Listen to this. This comes right out of Hosea, verse 10. Once you were not a people, lo ami. Once you were not a people. But now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, lo ruhamah. But now you have received mercy. Outside of Christ, no mercy, don't belong to the Lord, but for all those who turn from their sin and turn to Christ, they receive mercy, and they become part of the people of God forever. That's why we celebrate communion as we do, because not only because the Lord commanded it, because it is a reminder to us that because of the cross of Christ, excuse me, we have indeed received mercy, and we have been made part of the family of God. While our men come, let me pray, and we'll prepare to take